When you think about existentialism, you most likely think of philosophers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, or Camus. You almost certainly don't think about a kid named Luffy or a mysterious manga writer and artist named Oda who doesn't like to show his face in public. But One Piece is a celebration of freedom and authenticity and anti-authoritarianism. And so as I was watching it, I just had this one thought that I couldn't get out of my head. I was watching an existentialist show. So today we are going to talk about One Piece and existentialism and the meaning of life. Because existentialism is a philosophy of life. It is a philosophy that wants to help you live better. And I think one of the existentialist messages contained in One Piece is that we should all think a bit more like Luffy. To understand how One Piece is an existentialist show, we have to understand what existentialism is. But existentialism as a movement is quite difficult to define because it is so diverse and wide-ranging. Strictly speaking, only a couple of thinkers ever actually called themselves existentialist, and the term existentialism didn't even exist when Kierkegaard and Nietzsche were writing. One thing that helps us define existentialism is to think about the historical context in which it emerges. Existentialism seems to particularly flourish in authoritarian, oppressive, or totalitarian context. Basically, as the world becomes more oppressive, existentialist themes start to flourish in the intellectual scene and actually in the popular conception of the mind. I'm going to use an article from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as my guide to existentialism. This is written by Kevin Aho, and I am going to link it down below along with other resources about existentialism for you. In that article, Aho actually identifies 5 elements that he thinks characterize existentialism. There's nihilism, which is a rejection of an imposed or transcendent moral framework or a way of interpreting the world. Engagement, which is an emphasis on what we actually do and on human action. Freedom, which is the belief that what distinguishes human beings is our ability for self-consciousness. Authenticity, which is a critique of our tendency to obey entrenched social norms rather than honestly held convictions. And ethics, the idea that a morally praiseworthy life is possible even if nihilism is true. We'll keep all of those in mind, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on 2 major points that I think come out really clearly in the first season of One Piece. We're going to talk about how One Piece emphasizes the necessity of living a free and authentic life, and how One Piece critiques authoritarianism. In large part, One Piece is the story of Luffy, a boy who wants to become king of the pirates. We'll talk more about this whole king thing later on. From that summary, you might think that One Piece is a pretty standard adventure story. A boy leaves his small village, goes out into the world, and finds his fortune. But Luffy is actually a very different kind of protagonist, because one of the central points of One Piece is that Luffy is going to define what being a pirate is for himself. Luffy doesn't see piracy as an opportunity to simply enrich himself at the expense of others, or to give into a life of unrelenting debauchery, or go on murderous rampages. Instead, he sees a life of piracy as a path to true and authentic freedom, and that is a path that he gets to choose and define. And I think this comes out most clearly when we zoom out and look at how Luffy treats his crew. Each of Luffy's crew, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, are all distinct individuals, and one of the things that's really important about them is that they all have their own dream. Zoro wants to be the world's greatest swordsman, Sanji wants to discover a mythical ocean that has all of these great ingredients and he wants to become a great cook. Nami wants to draw a map of the world, and Usopp wants to overcome his fears and become a brave warrior of the sea like his father. And Luffy sees this as all perfectly right. In fact, you get the sense that the fact that they have their own dreams is one of the reasons that Luffy wants them on his crew. Luffy is looking for people who want to live free and authentic lives, and he doesn't view their freedom as somehow threatening his own. At the very end of this first season, all of the crew gets together on their ship and they all declare their dreams. All of them declare individual dreams, but they are choosing to work towards them together. You see, if the existentialists are correct, then the world does not give us meaning. There is no objective interpretive framework to the world. This might be a cause for despair for some of us, but the existentialist response is to say that we now get to go and make our own meaning. All of the Straw Hat Pirates want to live meaningful lives, but they have to define what that meaning is for themselves. Even a strong personality and captain like Luffy can't do it for them. And Luffy, as an existentialist hero, doesn't view his own freedom as being threatened by their freedom. There's this sort of meta moment in the show in episode 6 where I think the show really reveals its cards and it really tells you what it's all about. Nami is reading a story to Zoro, and when Luffy comes in, he offers some comments about it. And Nami tells him that he didn't interpret the story correctly. He missed the point. And Luffy says that stories can have more than one point. Now that dialogue might seem just like a passing moment. Maybe it's a way to characterize Luffy as being a kind of hard-headed or not very bright hero, which is true, but there's also some existentialist wisdom there. What Luffy is saying is that we get to interpret our lives. We get to make meaning for ourselves. It's really important that Luffy says this to Nami, because Nami is being exploited by Arlong. Because Arlong has captured her village and threatened her, she needs to pay a very large bounty in order to save them. But until then, her life is completely determined by what Arlong wants her to do. So we have Luffy saying that we get to interpret our lives, and we have Nami resigned to the fact that maybe she can't. Luffy is not going to provide meaning for his crew. He is going to help them as they pursue meaning on their own. He wants to help them live their lives authentically. And that brings us well to the critique of authoritarianism that's in One Piece. I mentioned before that existentialism tends to flourish or to become more prominent in oppressive context. Many of the most prominent writers in the existentialist movement were in France during the Nazi occupation from 1940 to 1944. Another example would be Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor and went on to become an existentialist psychotherapist. One Piece as a show and as a manga is kind of goofy. Especially in the manga, there's a lot of slapstick, and there is a lot of comedy in the show. But the world of One Piece, when you dive into it a little bit, is actually quite dark. We quickly learn that there is a single world government that is just ominously called the world government, and the primary way that the world government interacts with citizens is through its military. Yes, the Marines are supposed to fight pirates and protect people, but they often end up being bought off or terrorizing villagers on their own. The other major force in One Piece is piracy, but Luffy and a few other exceptions really are the exceptions. Most pirates view piracy as a way to accrue wealth and fame and power. They will terrorize villages, demand tribute, or simply murder because they want to. This is authoritarian in all directions, and it would be very easy to adopt a cynical perspective in an environment like this. You might come to the conclusion that the best you could hope for is to join the military or become a pirate yourself and gain enough wealth and power and prestige that you would get to be in charge. But Luffy and the Straw Hats are actually a rejection of this choice. Yes, they're pirates, but as Luffy points out time and time again, he gets to be his own kind of pirate. They are going to live free and authentic lives, and this is going to lead to a constant struggle against authoritarianism, which is another common existentialist theme. So Luffy and his crew resist the Marines, and they resist other pirates, especially when they threaten the innocent or the vulnerable. Luffy is almost gleefully anarchic throughout the series in a really inspiring way. And that brings me to a very important point about the series, this thing that Luffy will not stop talking about, and that's becoming king of the pirates. Now, you would be forgiven for wondering, is Luffy's dream of living a true, free, and authentic life compatible with his desire to become king of the pirates? After all, becoming a king is to place yourself at the top of a hierarchical and oppressive structure. So you might be worried that at the heart of One Piece, there lies this contradiction. First off, I would just say that early on in the show, we don't yet know what it means to be king of the pirates. And second, and this is probably the more important point, if Luffy ever is to become king of the pirates, he is going to get to define what it is to be king. Just like he has reinterpreted piracy to be about freedom and authenticity, maybe being king of the pirates is about bringing that freedom and authenticity to the entire world.